Welcome Scott Vaughn to the stage.
Thanks. Okay, we didn't have questions after the last one, but I'm going to try to speak to some of those issues. I'm coming from a little bit different perspective. I'm actually a doctor, and a lot of my original doctoral research 30 years ago was actually titled Technology and Nihilism. I was interested in how technology and unemployment would affect man's soul, his psyche, his mind. So I'm going to try to propose a kind of diagnosis of what's going on here and a solution as well, part of which is part of which I call the entrepreneurial artisan. So the idea of technology and nihilism, an example is communication and transportation have developed so rapidly that people can no longer hold their universal value system. When communities for centuries had one universal value, they were very cohesive. Now, when you juxtapose the rapidity of communication and transportation, you have a struggle to believe. You have relativism, nihilism. It leads to depression, anxiety, and this is only increasing. Another example is that technology does away with forced employment. People have time on their hands. What do they do with that? Again, reflection brings anxiety, depression. Nietzsche was one of the first to proclaim this when he said that God was dead, but God was just the first universal. Now all the universals of science are dying. People are still willing to kill for it, though. People are willing to kill their neighbor in order to continue to believe what they believe in, because to have someone next to you that believes something different is a threat to your soul. So this is a serious problem, and it's not going away. Freud also diagnosed it in Civilization and its malaise or discontents, that the majority of psychological and physical diseases are coming from evolution. So what are we going to do about it? Well, let's go back to another philosopher, Hegel. Hegel said that basically the development of man, the development of man's spirit or soul is based on the negation of nature, meaning he negates his animal instincts. So we've gone over eons from survivalism, survival of the fittest, the struggle to survive, to forms of master and slave that have been more and more refined until the present era when we have wage slavery. The process is still not finished. It's been something that people have been struggling with for the past few centuries. In my view, neither capitalism nor socialism can answer the problem. There's a stalemate. So Marx tried to push this forward. The problem with Marx is that he interpreted it as materialism. He didn't bring the idea of man's meaning or desire into the picture. This is where Freud came in. So what is a solution? Well, already in the Middle Ages, there were certain free men who were declaring themselves free from indentured servancy and developing a kind of craft or art. They then developed into collectives or guilds where they exchanged and traded these things. This was actually the birth of what I call pre-capitalism, or what I call mercantilism, to reappropriate the term. It was about the free market. It's mercantilism, not capitalism. That was the original form of free market exchange. Then what happened was that capitalism, as it says, cap or head, is a kind of artificial top-down takeover of the free market. And it artificially has been propped up for several centuries. So you have continual attempts at a reemergence of this free market, entrepreneurialism, and then the restoration of the cap. And at the same time, attempts to solve it socialistically, again, through a top-down solution. But you can't enforce a social equality on people. It doesn't work that way. So we're at this stalemate. Socialism offers equality without freedom. Capitalism or a free market offers freedom without equality. Where do we go with this? Okay, so let's take a case example. I'm going to use a case example of what I call the entrepreneurial artist. Williamsburg, Brooklyn, place that I've lived for 20 years. When I moved there, it was an industrial wasteland, and people who wanted to be free, to not be wage slaves, moved there to live cheaply, to live freely, to develop their desires. Given the freedom to develop their desire, they eventually created their own businesses. Their means of survival emerged naturally out of their own desires. So they started up businesses, schools, clinics, galleries, cafes. Then you have this sort of collective community that would have developed out of a free market system going all the way back to the Middle Ages, instead of a different form of capitalism. Now, this is one case of it. Of course, it's happened all over during the 20th century. But generally, it was the urban areas that had been abandoned from industrialism that were there to be taken over by these communities. Now it's continually college towns, another opportunity people have. So you have this kind of struggle now between the decay of the old system and the emergence of this new kind of collectivism. What happens, for example, in Williamsburg, which is just one of many cases, is that by creating this sort of desire-based collectivist economy, people actually, it's what people want. People want desire. Desire desires desire. So it becomes the center of consumption. People come to consume the desire that was created by this kind of free market capitalism in a place like Williamsburg. And then the producers, the large-scale corporations, come afterwards. They see the opportunity to develop it, and they create condos and chains. And now Williamsburg is not what it used to be, but it's feeding off the original desire or the name, the symbolic meaning that it once had, which is also okay, because then the migration goes elsewhere, and the people who created that go to some other place. Except that, interestingly now, we have a sort of limit point to this wave. There's fewer and fewer places in urbanity for it to happen. I'm not sure where it's going to go. Maybe it will start to redistribute back into the country. There's movements where people are interested in going, let's say, upstate, where there's cheap land, develop their own farms, their own communities. Of course, this is all stuff that was happening from World War II into the 60s and 70s. It's just that there were a lot of ideologies that stopped it from succeeding. Now maybe it's happening in a kind of spontaneous emergent sense, so it's more real. If you can develop a community of exchange between one and another person, that's a good start. If you can do it with a couple other friends or family, that's already miraculous. If you can start to unfold it into larger collectives, that's something great too. One of the ways that this survives, or that this could survive against a large-scale capitalism, because people will say, of course it's not going to work because it's expensive. Nobody wants to go to the health food store and buy food there because it costs a lot more. Nobody wants to go to a high-end coffee place and pay twice as much for a coffee. Actually, it turns out that's not true if you see what's actually happening. The way that it works is that what is offered by the small-scale entrepreneurial artisan and his small businesses is that you have both a higher quality product and you have a more ethical way of producing it. People are interested in meaning. I said that nihilism was the result of large-scale technology, unemployment, and capitalism. So what is it that people are craving more than anything? Some kind of meaning. People are now consuming the meaning of ethical relations and aesthetic beauty. Meaning, if you can be a coffee place that offers a superior coffee to anyone else, and something that is ecological or fair trade in the world, and it costs twice as much, people do buy it. I can show you many examples. In fact, if it's 10 times as much, people buy it. In fact, that's what desire-based economy is. If you want to look at the fashion industry, or if you want to look at the way that places like Williamsburg purposely don't market themselves, or they hide their name or their location, this is a Freudian psychoanalytic truth. Desire desires lack or absence or scarcity or rarity. And so this is a way to overturn the idea. So we shouldn't be afraid of unemployment. It's what we always wanted. What we should try to look at is what's going to fill the place. Well, I'm saying that not only is the place filled by desire and meaning and spirit, but it actually gives the seeds for a new type of economy. And even more than that, this new type of economy was already emergent 500 years ago. And it was already existent thousands of years ago in various small pockets. All the references for this are out there. I'm not going to quote them today, but if you want to find me or find me at my clinic institute at newclinic.org. I will be happy to give you the references behind this, because there are a lot of historical and economic references. I'm not just talking about my personal experience, which is also true, but personally also working with people individually, working with patients with psychological or physical problems. The answer of finding their desire, which they left behind at some point, splitting desire and means of survival, helps them to resolve their problem. Physical diseases and psychological problems go away when you do that. And when people actually reach that, I realize that the final stage is that the clinical issue becomes a social issue. They need to take it out into the world then. And that's where the social economy has to change. So the revolution that's going to take place is not a top-down political revolution. It's not going to be solved by demonstrations, even though that might be helpful. I'm not against it. For me, it's going to be solved one by people following their desire and producing it and exchanging it with each other. So it looks different. Okay, that's it. We have time for questions. All right. Yeah. Oh, okay.
Question?
Okay.
Hi. I'm just wondering, do you think that as things become more globalized and the world essentially becomes a smaller place, that there's kind of an increasing sense of ennui or like world weariness, that's just something that is inevitable with technology and technological advances?
Absolutely. I mean, I basically said as much just a minute ago, but I'll add a little bit to that, which is that what I'll add to Freud and Heidegger and Hegel is that there's a particular kind of transglobal ennui. And the solution I see is that when the juxtaposition of universals is broken and you have this kind of collective truth, that forces the individuation again, meaning we're not going to find it in a country or a nation or even in a club. We're going to find it in collectives that allow for diversity and freedom, meaning can I join a family or a community of people that can actually listen to me and respect me and enjoy my difference and thrive off of argument and conflict, which was what the Socratic system was about. It's what the Greek philosopher political system was about. With the tie, standing up.
First of all, I wanted to ask you where you got that really cool suit.
You'll have to ask me in private.
Okay. Second of all, would you describe yourself as someone who has pioneered a sort of movement, even though you said that a lot of your thinking and your methods are, have been out there, have been documented, and based in philosophy? Is there a certain new type of therapy or process that you might describe your work to?
Sure, that's what I usually lecture about, is what I actually do in my clinic, new forms of integral medicine and psychiatry and how that relates to art and production. This is what most of my work is about. I'm not talking about it here, I'm talking about the economic aspects of that. But I'm a militant of what I believe in, which is anti-guruism. So I don't lead movements, but in my work with people, I try to lead them to lead themselves to their own movement. So that's what I would hope from people, is they'd be definitely that they would be inspired to find their own path towards this, what desire they have and where that would lead them. Yes.
One last quick question.
Okay.
What's the fastest way for artists to do the takeover instead of the machines?
Well, okay, all right. So I criticize some of my artist friends because some of them, once they actually do get fame, which they haven't had and they've been looking for their creative desire, they don't realize that they lose the most important part of it. They get blinded by it and they go for the economy and the recognition and lose the creative spark. That's why most people in Hollywood are depressed or anxious or something else. So you have to be strong enough to stay with your original desire and purpose and not let it be corrupted by your success. And also, on the other end of the spectrum, my artists who are sort of radical leftists, they argue for a kind of political art, which is great, but they also are craving the same kind of attention. And the idea that you can have I mean, they just want to be artists, which is great, but I actually think that it doesn't work either way. In other words, rock and roll is an example. When the artist's desire and sovereignty was rare, then there was more demand than supply. So of course, each one of them could get famous and rich. Now, the young children who have actually been brought up with plenty of money and told you can be whatever you want, you can be an actor or a rock and roll star, they get there, and of course they can't, because the political economy of desire and fame has changed. So there's never going to be that sort of ability to get that famous again. A Bob Dylan today wouldn't make that much money if he came up today. So famous for 50 minutes, Warhol was right. Everybody would be famous for 50 minutes. That means everybody should be an artist and they should produce something useful for the economy. It can be decoupled or it can be coupled, even better. But that's sort of the solution for me, is do both. Develop an art of your trade and develop a trade of your art that work in tandem.